it's time for our second week at home distance learning. And as usual, I was happy for the ones I got to see in our Zoom meeting on Thursday. I miss all of you guys. I love seeing your lovely faces. And for this week, for ELA, it'll be the same as last week. I want you to continue to keep up with your Reading Plus, 3 lessons a week or more, because the more greens you make, the higher your percentage, and your 2 vocabulary lessons. And then if you can, because I know iReady's been having some issues, I would like 1 to 3 iReady reading lessons as well. Now, last week for social studies, we talked about how the governor of Virginia kind of sent George Washington on almost a little spy mission to see what the French were doing in the Ohio Valley. And George Washington was convinced the French were preparing to attack them or fight against them or take the Ohio Valley, and went back and told the governor that. The governor agreed, so they were trying to plan on what to do and how to take Ohio Valley back from the French. What we're going to do today, we're going to go through 5 sources. I'm going to read them to you and go over them with you. And then there will be 4 questions based off the sources, and I'll go through those questions with you. Now remember, at home, when you're answering these questions, you have to use the RAP method. The R-A-P, R, restate the question, A, answer the question, and P, prove the question. That is the way you answer. That way I know you understood the question, you know how to find it, you didn't just pull it out thin air or just come up with it. You actually read the sources, studied it, and answered it correctly. All right, so for source 1, it is adapted from a letter to George Washington from Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie. Now remember, Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie was the Virginia governor that sent George Washington to go spy on the French, and George Washington came back, and they were trying to come up with a plan. The following are the instructions that Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie gave to George Washington as Washington and his men left Virginia for the Ohio Valley. You are to act on the defensive, but in case any attempts are made to obstruct the works or interrupt our settlements by any persons whatsoever, you are to restrain all such offenders, and in case of resistance, to make prisoners of or kill and destroy them. So basically what this is saying is, if anyone tries to attack you, you can restrain them and you can make them prisoners, or if you have to, you can even kill and destroy them. Basically, the governor was given permission to kill the French. Like, hey, if they get in your way, you can make them prisoners, and if they try to resist or hurt you, you can kill them. And basically, it was starting the acts of war, the acts of aggression. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, you have permission to kill them. Well, if people from one country start killing people of another country, that's already starting something, and this is starting to lead up to the official start of the French and Indian War. Now, on source 2, on the paper it says source 1 again. It's a typo. It's actually source 2. It's called the French Ambassadorial Party. The French, who had been captured by Washington, insisted that there had been an ambassadorial party sent by the French king to order the British from their territory. Now, ambassadorial is a representative of one country sent to negotiate a treaty. This was much like Washington's first mission to the Ohio Valley, and the French handed Washington a letter and papers as proof to their mission. Washington did not believe the French claims to be an ambassadorial party and stated that if they really were on a diplomatic mission, they would have presented themselves to the British rather than hiding in the Glen. So Washington captured a French party, and they're like, wait, we're not here to fight or anything. We're ambassadors. We're here to negotiate a treaty. Washington didn't believe them. He's like, really? If y'all were really ambassadors and here to negotiate a treaty, you'd go talk to the people in charge, the British government. You wouldn't be hiding over here in the bushes. Because if you think about it, if they're trying to negotiate, why are they hiding over here in like the woods and bushes? I would think that's funny. And George Washington thought it was funny. He didn't believe them, so he captured them and he took them. Now, source 3. Now, source 3 and 4 are kind of together. They're both about the Native Americans and their involvement in the French and Indian War. Source 3, it's adapted from Benjamin Franklin's Grand Design. In American colonies, England's military security rested in no small part upon her traditional alliance with the Iroquois. the 6 confederated nations. Remember, the British and the Iroquois got along very well, very violent, very warlike. Their alliance had been based on trade, and the bonds between the English settlers and her Indian allies had been stretched to the breaking point. The Iroquois saw the French using the break between Queen Anne's and the King George's wars to expand on the Mississippi and the Illinois County. Their tension mounted when the French boldly established Fort Niagara on Lake Erie as a bastion against them. So the Iroquois, the Native Americans that got along with the British and English, they got mad at the French because the French built a fort on Lake Erie in order to be able to fight against the Iroquois. The Iroquois were like, what? No. So they decided they were going to fight against the French with the British. Now, the next source is about Native Americans on the opposite side. It's the Delaware and the Shawnees. The Delaware and the Shawnees Native American tribes lived in the Ohio River Valley. They were traditional trading partners with the French and had been trading beaver pelts for European weapons and goods. Over the years, they had seen the gradual push by the British colonists who had taken land and had moved onto the frontiers of the Ohio country. After seeing the French defeat of General Braddock and his men at Fort Duquesne, the Ohio Native Americans allied with the French and conducted devastating attacks on frontier settlements in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. So the Delaware and the Shawnees, they decided to ally themselves with the French against the British. So it kind of makes sense now what's called the French and Indian War, because the British and the Iroquois were fighting against the French and all their Native American allies. All right, and that's why it's called the French and Indian War, because it was the French and the Indians fighting against the British. Now, source 5. This is called General Edward Braddock. This is basically the start. This source is the start of the French and Indian War. Washington and his men, which now totaled 293 men, had stationed at Fort Necessity. Washington had been given reports that a large force of French and Native Americans were advancing on their location. Washington tried to rally some of the Native Americans to help his cause, but he was unsuccessful. The next day, a force of 600 French and another 100 Native Americans approached the fort. A battle occurred, and the colonists were overcome by the French and Native American forces. The next day, a negotiation was made between the French and Washington. Washington surrendered, and he and his men returned to Virginia. The French destroyed the fort by burning it and returning to Fort Duquesne. Hearing of Washington's defeat, the king sent General Edward Braddock and approximately 2,000 men to the colonies in effort to protect the king's interests in North America. So this was basically kind of the first battle of the French and Indian War, which the British lost. If you remember something we discussed before we went on quarantine, we had talked about George Washington. This was his one and only defeat as a war leader. He had to surrender the fort because he had 293 men, and then the French and Native Americans attacked with 700 men. He was forced to surrender, and then the French burned down the fort, and George Washington and his men went back to Virginia. The British king, hearing what the French did, he was like, oh no, I don't think so, and sent 2,000 soldiers to America to protect his interest there in America. He's like, no. If the French are taking the land, that means they're taking resources. Remember, because more land, more resources, more money. And the British king was like, no, that's my land, that's my money. I'm going to send some soldiers over there. They're going to fight the French. I'm going to take that back and get my money back. And this little war or little battle between George Washington and the French and the Americans, where George Washington lost, is kind of seen as like the first battle of the French and Indian War, what started it off, the official start. All right. Now, if you go to your questions, each one is based off the sources. So your answer is going to be in the source it asks you about. It's very simple, very straightforward. The first question is, based on source 1, describe what motivated the British colonists to send a military force to the Ohio Valley. So you're going to go to source 1, look at it, and tell me, based on source 1, what motivated the British colonists to send a military force to the Ohio Valley was. For the second question, it says, based on source 2, describe what motivated the French into sending more troops to start a war with the British. You won't go, look at source 2, give me your answer. Then the fourth question is on base source 3 and 4. That's the two that were about the Native Americans. Based on source 3 and source 4, describe what motivated the Native Americans to enter into the war between the French and British colonists. Now, there's two sources. One is about the Iroquois, and the other is about the Delaware and the Shawnee Indian tribes. You need to talk about both of them in this answer. And then the last question for this week will be based on source 5, the last one, describe what motivated the British to enter the war with the French. Now, I understand that you may have some outside knowledge, but I want you to answer the questions based off of the sources. It's asking you from the sources, so I need your answers and your reasoning from the sources. All right? That is your social studies for this week. If you have any questions or if you need help, y'all know y'all can do the remind, you can call, you can text, you can ask for help. I am here to help you. And remember, for English, doing your Reading Plus, your 2 vocabulary, and then if you can, do some iReady, but I understand if you can't do the iReady. I love you guys, I miss you, and I can't wait till I get to see you again.